podcast is brought to you by LMU Munich.
So if you look at innovation, and it is kind of this buzzword, obviously everybody wants to be innovative and wants to have the most innovative team and so on. And if you look at healthcare innovations of the last couple of years, so I found this in Forbes magazine by an article by Blake Morgan, and she kind of listed the top 10 for her innovations in the healthcare system. And if you look at it, so for example, the Pennsylvania hospital, which is kind of a historical hospital, changed their traditional design, but also Boston Children's Hospital uses 3D models to shorten surgeries, or a startup uses big data to treat rare diseases. One of the most common denominators or understandings of innovation is always this idea of it has to be technical, right? We need to have an algorithm. We need to have a 3D printer that prints something. We need to have XR glasses or an XR experience that does this and that. What I think is all of these innovations have in common, actually, and this is where I want to lead you in, what kind of innovation principles actually are out there, is that all of them actually try to solve a problem. Okay, and this is kind of the idea of innovation. It's not about creating something new just for the sake of it. Maybe there are some innovations that are out there, but I think true innovation and true innovation processes always start with a problem, right? And to be more specific, right, they always don't start with technology, but they start with a human problem in terms of these relationships. And if you look at kind of the different fields and where innovation starts to grow, obviously a lot of the innovation mindset is kind of anchored in Silicon Valley and all of these tech startups. But if you look at the processes of innovation, there are always different ways to come at innovation. And usually that we like in innovation management, you come up with these 3 different spheres. Okay, one is, so does it actually work? So is it viable? Can we make money out of it? So from a business perspective, Amazon wants to create a new innovation because they want to make money, for example. Then there are tech companies also like Amazon or Google that say, okay, does the technology actually work? But the most important first step always has to be here. It needs to start with the human aspect. Okay, so this is always the first question that where an innovation process starts. Okay, it doesn't start with the tech, it doesn't start with the business, it always starts at the human part. Okay, let me just see, there are questions. But all of these innovations lead to tech because this is the business perspective. Obviously, yeah, so tech is one of the later steps of innovation, right? But it doesn't have to be. I think so a good innovation is not focused on the technology. It doesn't. It always focuses on the problem that it wants to solve, even if it starts with a human aspect, right? Sometimes technology can solve a problem, right? For example, I think that an algorithm is way better than a human to predict some kinds of diseases, right? So there is an actual need. Obviously, if we look at the economy and the market, there are obviously innovations out there that are not, beneficial for humans at the same time, only because of the business aspect. A good solution does not require tech. I wouldn't agree. I would say a good solution solves a problem. I think a good solution can also incorporate tech. It really depends on your understanding of technology, right? I would say a book is also a technology. I would say glasses are also a technology, right? I think it really depends on how you frame the question. Okay, Helen says, because then it can be replicated regardless of what access to resources people have. Yeah, obviously this is one of the selling points of big tech and what's called exponential technologies, that you can scale these things up without the human resources behind it. And this is why we really have to be very careful and responsible about how we scale these things up, and really critical, I would say, about this. So let me just go on, just to give you an understanding again. So there are 3 spheres of where innovation starts. So the human part, the business part, and the technological part. And usually we want to start here for various reasons. And this is kind of the transition into what's called design thinking. I don't know if you heard that term before or this buzzword that is out there. So design thinking is basically one innovation methodology or a mindset that helps you to structure your innovation through a process. There are different schools out there. So some say, so as a process, design thinking has different stages, like these 5 stages. Some say it has 6 stages. Some say it just has 3 stages. Some people, and I would believe myself to be part of that school, would say it's not so much about kind of this process or kind of the tools, but it's more about the mindset that lies behind that. And this is kind of what I just wanted to share with you in terms of the principles of innovation. So it's not so much important to me that you understand how design thinking works, even though we will use design thinking as an approach to innovation, because it's a human-centered approach. It has some advantages, but I think it's more important to me that you understand and kind of embrace these principles that I just wanted to mention to you in a second. Okay, the first principle, as I mentioned, is that it's absolutely user-centric. Okay, user-centric means we, as I mentioned, start with the human. We always have a human person in mind when we design something as an innovation. Okay, Amazon, for example, goes as far as, they aren't calling themselves user-centric, but user-obsessed. Okay, so that is kind of, one other way of tackling the problem or phrasing it. But this is one of the principles of design thinking, or human-centered design, as it's also called. One aspect that is very, very important to me, but also is being done, I think, quite a lot in the wrong way in design thinking, is that it should be problem focused. Okay, the idea of innovation and the idea of design as a principle or as a discipline is that it wants to solve problems. Okay, so these can be human problems, these can be environmental problems, it could be biotic problems whatsoever. One of the problems with innovation and the startup sphere is that a lot of people just love their solution. Okay, so I work with a lot of startups, and they come to me and say, I have this amazing solution. And as soon as they ask them, so what's the problem that you want to solve? They have no idea, right? And a good innovation process always has the problem in mind, right? Because it's so much more impactful if you can actually solve a problem than okay, I have this very cool technology that I came up with and I just want to sell it now. Okay, it's so much more efficient if you actually solve a problem with that. As I just mentioned, so this idea of design thinking, of user-centric design, is a systemic process, and my job will be to guide you through that process that we will launch upon in the next couple of days. Okay, so there is a specific, way of conducting that process and going through that, and my job will be to make you aware at what stage we are right now and help you with what are the tools and methodologies that will help you through that process. I mentioned this already. One crucial part of this design thinking innovation principle are teams. Teams are the cornerstone of every innovation process, because it really needs somebody like Helen, who before had a lot of negative associations with that idea, because we need that plurality of voices and different angles on problems, because only then we can be more creative in terms of how we solve that problem. I already mentioned this in the beginning. It should be fun, and it really should boost your creativity. And one way of doing this is by being visual. And I think this is one of the challenges that we have now, right? So we have to be visual in terms of communicating. So on the one hand, because we read so much nowadays, but also in terms of innovation, it helps you for your cognitive understanding of a problem, but also of a solution, to be more visual. But it also helps your possible user if you don't just tell them your idea, but if you actually have something that you can show them. One of the principles of this process is obviously, as I mentioned, failure. Okay, it's not a linear process. So a lot of people think, okay, I just walk through this process and then I'm done. What's really exhausting is that you really have to, as I mentioned, as will be mentioned in the next part, it is an iterative process. Okay, so a lot of people think, okay, I talk to the customers and then I build something and then I'm done. and then I have finished my innovation. Unfortunately, it never works like that. But you have to understand, and this is kind of the key takeaway that I want you to learn, is you have to create the mindset of understanding what you want to learn from your innovation and how you want to increase its effectiveness. The last two aspects are very important to me. So one is called first principles, which actually comes from physics, right? So one of the key aspects of innovation means that you go back to the first principles of reality. Okay, so this is something that Elon Musk, so the CEO and founder of Tesla, amongst other companies, likes to practice. So he's really questioning everything. Okay, so he likes to tell this example. When people told them, okay, batteries are very expensive, he questioned that. Okay, and I think is especially this mindset to question everything, to ask why, that really, gets people going and gets innovations get out into the world. And finally, the last one is connected to this, because the beginner's mindset is actually connected to the first principles. Because imagine yourself to be like a baby. Okay, so you look at a problem with an entirely new set of glasses, right? So a baby, or I mean, not a baby, but for example, my daughter always asks why. So why is there the sun? And I tell her, yeah, I don't know. There was it just evolved in the universe, and then she asks why, and so on, right? So you really, I know you're all experts in particular fields, but I think what innovation means is that we remain experts in one particular field, and at the same time we acquire a new, fresh pair of glasses on a problem. For example, like designing a new first aid kit. Okay, why does it have to be a box? Couldn't it be a backpack? Couldn't it be something entirely else? So this is kind of the idea of innovation, that we question each and everything that we face. And by learning, and this is why design thinking is a good process or a good set of methodology, and we learn by using different tools to become better and better in crafting the right thing. This is another visualization of this process that we will launch upon. Okay, so you saw the 5 stages that I showed you before, which is from the D School. This is another one that I really like, by the UK Design Council, and it's called the double diamond, right? Because there are 2 diamonds. Could also be called the glasses, but it doesn't sound so fancy. The basic idea is, we will start here with a problem area and really try to discover what problem you want to solve as your team. Okay, so there are a gazillion problems out there. What I notice in my experience from managing innovation teams is that it's really, really difficult for people to just pick one problem. Most of the time, people want to solve all problems for human history. This is really difficult, right? So you really want to focus. So the idea of this process is that in the beginning, you explore as much as possible about your user, about your problem, and so on. And this is why it's opening up here, right? So this is called divergent thinking. So this phase is divergent. You open yourself up to anything that is out there. This is why this idea of a beginner's mindset comes in handy, because you really look for inspiration. So for example, you want to tackle how COVID-19 is being handled at home. You try to soak up everything that you can of information, insights, interviews, and so on, that could help you in better understanding the problem. Okay, so the first phase is basically you want to discover the problem as much as possible, because only then you can have a better understanding of what the problem actually is. Okay, so we will talk about this tomorrow again, but just to give you an understanding what these phases are. As soon as you've accomplished that phase of understanding the problem, what you want to do is converge, right? Because you started diverging with your thinking and your inspiration, but now it's really important to come up with one problem. Okay, what is the one problem that you want to solve? And I will guide you through that process, because as I mentioned, it's really difficult to stick to one problem, but it doesn't hurt. Okay, so you will stick with one problem, and then, where's my mouse? Let's go here. At this point, we will again start to diverge. Okay, and here comes the creativity, or what's called the ideation phase, where we will try to come up with as many solutions as possible for tackling and solving that problem, right? And this will be difficult again because, having a lot of ideas is sometimes not easy, but I will again guide you through the process. And then at the final stage, we will again converge our thinking by picking, one solution that we can then prototype. Okay, so it's always kind of this transition between diverging our thinking and converging and making decisions. And I will, as I mentioned, help you with that process. Just to show you or give you another understanding of how that process works, okay, we can use these principles of divergent and convergent thinking. So as it says here, opening up your thinking and then making choices in every area of understanding a problem. So first of all, finding a problem, and then solving the problem, and then executing or deploying it. So in terms of how can a business model actually be created out of that. Having said that, I just wanted to briefly mention that we will not focus on how to build a business model extensively, because I think, as I mentioned, it is so much more impactful if you start here by really understanding a problem and then coming with an innovative solution out of that, because then you can use the same technology or techniques and methodologies for creating a business model that works out of that. Just that you've seen it once, okay, design thinking apparently can be used for anything. So we use it for maybe a service or a product now in the framework of these 2.5 days. It can also be, nowadays it is used for systems, for large scale systems, for institutions and so on. So I think one of the advantages of design thinking as a way to tackle problems is that it is really versatile in terms of we can really use it for different spheres and occasions. Let me just quickly mention another very important innovation principle, and this has been, voiced or published by Eric Ries in this book, The Lean Startup, which came out a couple of years ago. And this really is a milestone in terms of how innovation works. I think one of the basic principles of that book that I really want to, emphasize, especially in this group, is actually what he calls everybody is an entrepreneur. So he's saying entrepreneurs are not only the ones that come up with an innovation, or they are not only the ones that founded a startup or a company, but he's saying entrepreneurs are people that want to solve problems, right? They want to learn how to, solve problems that actually matter to society, and really has this very general understanding of what an entrepreneur is. And I think I really like that. And I briefly wanted to share with you one of his core principles. Maybe you've seen that, and it's very, very similar to how science actually, or different scientific fields work. His idea of how you build an innovation is called the build, measure, learn cycle. Okay, and the basic idea is that you build a prototype of your solution, and then you have specific hypotheses. We will talk about this extensively tomorrow. Then you build hypothesis, what you want to test or verify or falsify with your innovation. Then you measure that, you create data, and then you learn how to improve the product or the service or whatever you're building. And what's very exhausting in this is that this very iterative stage or cycle never ends. Okay, so startups are really defined by how quickly they can build something, how quickly they can roll it out to test something, and then how quickly they can learn from that and create a better experience out of that. We'll talk about this again tomorrow. So how do you build one of these prototypes? And all of you are, now prototyping experts, because you all have already built a first aid toolkit. And just to, visualize again what the idea of building a prototype is, or what's also called a minimum viable product. Okay, so the first sphere here tells you how prototyping is usually done in the automotive industry. Okay, so you want to build a new car, then you first build the wheels, and then the fuselage, or what it's called, and then you have the car. A better way, a way more faster way of building a prototype is this one. Okay, and what all of these things have in common is what you want to create with a prototype is you want to create an experience. Okay, you don't want to create a car. You want to have as many iterations as possible that all can be given to a user. So somebody who wants to have a car or somebody who doesn't want to have a car. And all of these prototypes actually work. Okay, so a person can stand on a skateboard or a scooter or a bike or a motorcycle and then a car. And by understanding, and so in each of these cycles, you have one of these what's called build, measure, learn cycles. Okay, so one, your assumption is, okay, I want to give our user the experience of riding, and then you can see and learn from that experience how you actually design that car. This sounds kind of intuitive, I guess, and naive if you have done that already. This is really a big challenge for all the big corporations out there. So all of these, classical corporations like BMW, the automotive industry, and so on, because what they have been doing the last couple of years and decades was always, okay, we build something and then we try to sell it. And this is the difference in terms of what's called an agile mindset in terms of innovation, is that you don't simply build the end product, but you build tiny little prototypes and then give it as soon and as quickly as possible to your user. And while a big company would say, well, I don't, isn't that embarrassing? I want to give my final my end customer the finished, brilliantly shining, sparkling car. Startups would say no, because you want to learn as quickly as possible in which direction your innovation should go. Because all you have as a company, as a person, as a team, are assumptions, right? And what you want to do with this idea of innovation is you want to test your assumptions, right? This is kind of the principle behind that. Okay. Since we're all scientists, I can tell you this, okay? So the true form of innovation actually works like this, like a Jackson Pollock painting, okay? Innovation is really messy. You never know, where you're going, because otherwise it would be too easy. And, way more people would create, successful innovations. But in reality, innovation always looks like this. Design thinking and all of these tools and processes just help us to better manage that process. And by using these tools and methodologies and so on, and different principles, they make us better innovators, but they can never eradicate the complexity of reality that is out there, right? But they just give us a framework that could work.